All right, the next few lectures we're going to discuss the reproductive system. And again, the goal is not to make reproductive physiologists out of you, but we think it's important for you to have a general understanding of the anatomy of the female and the anatomy of the male, and also a little bit about the hormone regulation. And all of that is to get a general understanding of the tract of the cow and the bull so that you have an understanding of problems that occur, the actual calving process. You can understand that a little bit better. But then also on the female, the understanding of the actual hormone regulation process so that you can begin to manipulate that cycle so that we can set up cows to artificially inseminate. But it's also important to understand the reproductive anatomy if you want to do artificial insemination or embryo transfer or other fertility type treatments. And so that's kind of the goal today, is to give you that general background of the reproductive system of beef cattle. So let's have just a general discussion on the reproductive tract of heifers and cows and discuss that. So again, on the cow-calf side of the business, we've already talked about fertility and how important it is to get that cow to breed or that heifer to breed for the first time, and then carry that calf all the way through gestation, and then make sure that that cow or heifer has a live calf as well. So with that, a little bit on anatomy. So as we see the broad perspective of the anatomy of the beef cow, we could see the rectum, and the rectum is important because it kind of is our eyes. Through palpation and artificial insemination, one hand is inserted into the rectum, and then we can feel and manipulate the reproductive tract to decide if the cow's bred or if there's any problems, or through the artificial insemination procedure. The outer portion of the reproductive tract is the vulva, and then we have the vagina. You can see the pelvis wall there. The tract sits in. We also see the bladder. We got the cervix that goes in there. The broad ligament supports the tract. Then we have the uterus and the uterine horns, and finally the oviduct, and then the ovary where that actual egg is released there. And so that gives you an idea of just kind of the big picture of the reproductive tract. Now let's just go through and we'll discuss a little bit more on those parts. Here's just another slide that talks a little bit more in detail of the tract and just an overhead perspective of it, of outlining where the anatomy is in the cattle. So the female reproductive system, the broad ligament, its primary goal is to suspend the reproductive organs, and it's got the arteries, veins, and nerves that support that. The ovaries are the primary reproductive organ, similar to the testicles in the male, and they produce the female gamete, or the gamete ovum, or the egg that will eventually be released, and if sperm is present, fertilization can occur. The ovaries, they also produce the female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. They're monocotyous, meaning one egg is released, and if sperm is present, then that egg is fertilized and becomes a developing fetus there. As far as the ovary, it's important to have an understanding of the stages of follicular growth on that ovary. And again, it goes back to being able to palpate those ovaries and diagnose any potential problems. We also have a better understanding of, when we have that follicular wave, how we can manipulate the estrous cycle of a cow to get her ready to breed artificial insemination. Maybe also even in natural service, we can group cattle together to where they're going to be calving in a shorter period of time as well. So the stages of follicle growth, the first one is the primary follicle, and it's surrounded by a single layer of follicular cells. The secondary follicle, which is a primary layer, has multiplied into two different layers. The tertiary, or growing follicle, begins to form the antrum. And then finally the Graafian follicle, which is a mature follicle, and it appears just like almost a blood blister on that ovary. And if ovulation does not occur, the follicle will be eventually broken down. But when ovulation occurs with that Graafian follicle, that blister bursts and the actual ovum comes out and falls into the oviduct there. The corpus hemorrhagicum is the next stage, and that forms after the ovulation of the follicle, and it's essentially a blood clot that fills that cavity. The corpus luteum is an important stage of that follicular growth, because what happens after we see that corpus hemorrhagicum, the corpus luteum begins to form, and the luteal cells form after that. And so what it is just a solid mass of yellow cells. It's formed about 4 to 5 days after the estrus. It's got a 13-day lifespan if no conception occurs. If conception occurs, then it's maintained throughout the pregnancy there. If it does not occur, we get luteolysis, which is the degeneration of the corpus luteum. And we'll talk about that in further detail when we get into artificial insemination and managing the estrus cycle. The next stage is the corpus albicans, which are connective tissue that replace the luteal cells. And I kind of think about the corpus albicans as more of kind of like the scar tissue that's formed after that complete process has occurred. So as you see in this graph here, we've got a lot of different follicles, and there's not just at one time, there's not just one follicle that's going through this series. There's lots of follicles being developed, and there's multiple stages going on the ovary at any given time. And so you could have a lot of different primary follicles developing there. And so you can see we've got the primary follicle, the secondary follicle, the tertiary follicle, and you can see the antrum is beginning to develop there. And then finally the Graafian follicle, which is almost a blister type protrusion on that ovary. And then you can see we've seen the ruptured follicle, and the actual ovum or the egg is released into the oviduct. After that is formed, the CH has developed, that red spot there. And then finally after the CH is the corpus luteum, and then the corpus albicans are after that. Sometimes you can see some follicles that may not develop and may just be persistent there. And that can be some challenges when you get into some ovaries that may be cystic or some types of things, and they have to have treatment for those cattle to begin to cycle properly again and be fertile. Just some additional pictures. You can see the ovary, the top right, and the different follicles or different stages of production there on that ovary. The bottom right, you can see that Graafian follicle. It just looks like a little blister on that ovary. And then there's a cross-section of a corpus luteum there on the bottom left, and you can see that yellow luteal type tissue. Here's another picture, and you can see there a developing follicle on that ovary. You're beginning to see that fluid pocket filled there. Here's another picture of a Graafian follicle on that cow. So as you can see, it's a very large, almost a blister on that ovary with that ovum inside, and that'll be released upon ovulation. The corpus hemorrhagicum, again, after the Graafian follicle, and you can see it's got the blood, lymph, and granulosa cells. You can see it's kind of a blood spot, as you can see that cross-section of that CH there. And then finally the corpus luteal, we've discussed it, and then this picture shows that solid tissue, that yellow mass there, which is the corpus luteum. And then the corpus albicans, there's another picture of an ovary there, and the albicans are just that white tissue. It's almost like a scar tissue is one way that I like to describe it. And then they'll finally regress back into the ovary as well.